Some opportunities to win on Friday evening, but unfortunately, the Louisville Cardinals dropped the matchup against the Florida State Seminoles. We will break down the loss for the Cardinals on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time, as always, to say thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube and WHAS 11+, 5 days a week. Your team every day. Obviously, we are breaking down the Friday night loss for the Louisville Cardinals football team against the Florida State Seminoles. We will begin by discussing the initial reaction and big takeaways, which are all kind of centered around inconsistency. We will then take a little bit of a step forward looking into the future and answering the question, what does this mean for the team moving forward? And then in the final segment, we will talk about why, yes, it's good that we saw progression and improvement, but at the end of the day, there's a harsh reality to the matter. So getting right into it, there's a lot to unpack from this matchup. A lot of hype coming into this game with a win against Central Florida. You know, a lot of the fan base was trying to get back onto the train after jumping off of the train after the loss to Syracuse. Now, you know, it's Friday afternoon and Cardinal Stadium is packed. There's a lot of people tailgating. They were loud. I have a lot of respect for the Louisville fan base for coming out in this one and really cheering hard and supporting the team. Shout out to the athletic administration for the improvements that they made at Cardinal Stadium with the Wi-Fi and some of the pricing at the concessions and the lines, the time that it took to go through the lines at entries was extremely reduced. So those were some great improvements that, the athletic department basically came out and they said right away that this was going to be something. I don't like that. Sorry for the bland background. Can't really do too much with it. But regardless, I thought that, Friday night had the stage set for what could have been a win that got everyone back on the Scott Satterfield train, or the majority of the fan base. Unfortunately, however, the Louisville Cardinals kind of squashed some opportunities after some Florida State turnovers, after some mishaps from the Seminoles, and weren't able to come out victorious in this one. An interception on the final drive proved to be the final nail in Louisville's coffin in this one. The Cardinals are now 1-3. Like I said, I think that the main takeaway from this game is the fact that, look, consistency has been an issue for the Louisville Cardinals since 2020. I think that the takeaway from this game is that the overall inconsistency in a game proved to be detrimental and ultimately led to the loss here for the Cardinals on Friday evening. So, and what I mean by that, when I say overall consistency is that, one aspect of the game the Cardinals do well in, maybe even a couple of them, but there's always one aspect that kind of holds the team back. I can't think of the last time that I look back in Scott Satterfield's tenure and think, well, this game, they played 4 quarters of consistent football. Usually it's like, okay, you'll get 2 to 3 quarters of consistent football. There's a quarter or two where you're like, we got to make some changes. But ultimately, the consistency issue has been the factor. And if there's a statistic that is very evident of that fact, it's one that Kelly Dickey sent out on Friday night. 10 of Louisville's last 18 losses. In 10 of Louisville's last 18 losses, the Cardinals have outgained their opponents in terms of yardage. And that goes to show you is that in a lot of ways, Louisville outplays their opponents. And I think that it's more frustrating to know that in in more often cases than not, Louisville's the better team than the teams that they lose to. I mean, the consistency factor in this one was pretty evident throughout. I thought that the Cardinals started out pretty solid. I mean, it was 14-14 after the first quarter. Defensively, they kind of struggled here and there throughout the first quarter in terms of, marking receivers downfield. But the Cardinals, I like the offensive play calling. I thought that in the first quarter, Scott Satterfield mixed some stuff up. Malik Cunningham was throwing the ball a lot more. Sure, they punted on the first possession, had a 3-and-out, but the next two drives were drives that went over 70 yards and ended up finding the end zone. I thought that Malik Cunningham and the rest of the Louisville team did a very good job. Offensive line-wise, look, there were, I think, a handful of sacks, but Malik Cunningham and the offensive line were, for the most part, on the same page. Running the ball, the Cardinals did pretty well as well. But I think that allowing the opponents to stay in the game and in Louisville not stepping on the gas when they need to has been a problem over the past couple seasons. And that one of those examples were when it was 14-14, Louisville fumbled and then got the ball back on an interception, immediately had a 3-and-out. Florida State punted and Louisville got a touchdown. Which put them up 21-14 in the first half, and the Cardinals were looking good. They had another punt, Florida State did, and the Cardinals had a good opportunity to go about and try to put this game into a double-digit scenario in halftime. They ended up fumbling right after that. Now, granted, whether you want to say it was forward progression or things of that nature, I'm not going to disagree with you if you say that, because I still am kind of on the fence anyway, and usually you feel like that play would have been blown dead because of the forward progression. But at the end of the day, it was a fumble, and Florida State got the ball back. Thankfully for the Cardinals, another interception, but a punt right after that. Louisville not able to really take advantage of that, so they went into halftime with a 7-point lead immediately after Florida State ran I had to read that right. 10-play, 75-yard drive. Louisville punted, followed by a Florida State punt, another Louisville punt, another Florida State punt. So the defense did a solid job there. The Cardinals ended up getting the touchdown. Florida State follows it up with a touchdown. Louisville with a field goal. And then after that, it kind of all goes downhill. Louisville had a 31-28 lead, and then Florida State ended up scoring the final touchdown of the game. And the Cardinals really were not able to take advantage of the mishaps and the aspect of the turnover margin and the penalties and things of that nature. Louisville struggled. They turned the ball over 3 times. Yes, Florida State had some turnovers as well. But at the end of the day, you had 11 penalties for 81 yards. A lot of those were in coverage. Louisville's defensive backs struggled against Florida State. I understand that, Johnny Wilson is a tough man to guard, 6'7". But if you realize that something is not working early on in the game, I feel like there should have been maybe a personnel change to at least try something different, because it seemed that Louisville's defensive backs were struggling all night long with Johnny Wilson. This is a tough game to swallow. This is a result that arguably Louisville was the better team, in my opinion. Jordan Travis, the Florida State quarterback, went out in that first half, and the Noles had to put in their backup quarterback, Tate Rodemaker. He was 6 for 10, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns to an interception. But it was a matter of Louisville not necessarily being able to get off the field on third down at times, giving up some big yardage plays, which was tough as well. This is probably a game that Kendrick Duncan Jr. and Jarvis Brownlee probably would like to have back. But overall, I don't think that the Louisville secondary really played all that well. I thought that the pass rush was solid. I think that Louisville was able to get into the backfield. I think that the Louisville offensive line did a great job of sort of neutralizing the Florida State defensive line, which, if you remember from last week, I said that that's probably going to be one of the best defensive lines that you're going to play all season long, and I truly mean that. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, this is a tough loss to take, because, this arguably should have been a victory. Louisville played enough to get the victory. It's just in a close game like that, you have to, cross your T's and dot your I's, and you have to handle the little things well. And Louisville, which has been the recurring theme over the past 3 years since 2019, is that they've struggled in that aspect of football games. And, the mantra in the offseason was finishing games, finishing in the fourth quarter. And yes, you might have done that against Central Florida, but that same issue popped up against Florida State. A lot of the fan base now is kind of in a frenzy almost with the team 1-2 with a tough schedule to close out the season. So, I think that the takeaway for this one is that there were some good things that I saw from Louisville on Friday night, but the same issues that we've seen over the past couple seasons continue to be issues here in year 4 of Scott Satterfield. To where in the last segment we'll talk about why, yes, you can appreciate the improvements, but at the end of the day, it doesn't truly matter all that much. Truthfully, I've struggled with determining what to say here in this segment. I'm pretty disappointed for sure. This was a gut-wrenching loss, one of those where I left Cardinal Stadium kind of just feeling hopeless and just so discouraged after it. I know that it's a long season, and we'll talk about that here in the next segment of how the Louisville can resurrect their season. To make a long story short, the Cardinals did themselves no favors. I think what's frustrating the most is that Louisville went up against a backup quarterback in this one. In the second half, the defensive backs struggled pretty much all night long, gave up some big chunk yardage to Florida State, and weren't able to clutch it out in the end. So Cardinals dropped to 1-2. The focus now turns to week 4 against South Florida. I want to talk about what this loss means in terms of implications for the remainder of the season. We'll do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all of the latest football developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. BetOnline is also actually not opening weeks, but week 3's going into week 4's games. BetOnline is also your continued source for your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Excuse me. Like I said, Cardinals are now 1-2, and the margin of error could not be any slimmer. In no way am I saying that the season is over. I'm not saying that because theoretically this team could do a complete 180. They could keep improving. They could, rattle off a win streak, and maybe here in a month or so we're talking a different situation. We're singing a different tune per se, but ultimately I'm taking things for what they are right now, and that's the fact that the Cardinals are 1-2. So what does this mean for the rest of the season? I kind of alluded to it. The margin of error becomes even slimmer to the point now where you can't allow any more mishaps. You have to beat the teams that you were supposed to beat and more. Because coming into the season, you had a tough back half of the schedule. The front half, I'm thinking, okay, I remember coming on an episode, I think that there's a chance that Louisville could go 6-0. 5-1 is probably the most comfortable that I would be after that. You're 1-2. To even make it to where there's a chance, now you're fighting for bowl eligibility. Let's call a spade here. And I'm not saying that they can't get to that number. And I'm not saying that if they don't win the next 3 games that they're not going to get there. But let's speak logically. Because theoretically speaking, yes. I mean, in the realm of possibilities, of all the possible possibilities out there, yes. Could Louisville win the last 6 games? Of course they can. Is it probable? No. Possible? Yes. I'm not going to sit here and operate under the realm of possibility. I'm going to look at this from an unbiased point of view. If what you're looking for in this podcast is for me to tell you that everything's okay and that that this team could go 10-2, I'm not going to sit here in sunshine pump. but I'm not going to sit here and be a Debbie Downer as well. I try to look at things from an analytical standpoint, from a standpoint of being unbiased. My unbiased take is that this team has some more work to do. They are improving, but there is no margin of error. When you look at the remainder of the schedule, there is still the possibility that this team could get bowl eligibility and they could maybe get that 7-win mark. But let's look at it. In the last 9 games, you have South Florida, Boston College, and Virginia. All of those teams you're likely probably going to be favored against. All 3 of those teams you need to beat, because if you beat those teams, you're at 4-2, which is solid, because I think if you would have asked people after the first 6 games, Louisville's 4-2, people would probably be like, I mean, it's not the worst thing, right? Yeah, I mean, if you go 4-2, it takes a little bit of the sting away, but there still is more work to be done. Even if you were factoring in the win against James Madison in October, you're sitting at 5 wins. You're sitting at 5-2 cumulatively. So the last 5 games of the season for the Cardinals is all ranked teams currently. Pittsburgh ranked, Wake Forest ranked, Clemson top 5, NC State top 15, Kentucky top 10. So 3 top 15 teams and 5 overall top 25 teams. Now, granted, you could tell me, hey, Dalton, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, even Clemson, North Carolina State haven't really been all that impressive. So realistically, are they going to be ranked by the time that Louisville plays them in their respective weeks? Perhaps not. And I think that that's something that you could also make a talking point, is that, hey, look, Louisville played good against these teams last year. If they keep improving, who knows what could happen? And we could be, you're right on the cusp of bowl eligibility before that, before the 9th and 10th games respectively of the season. So look, I'm not saying that the season's over, and I'm not saying that the team has to win out, but I'm being real here. I'm looking at the rest of the schedule and I'm thinking, okay, there's 4 teams that you should beat. You're probably going to beat South Florida, and you're probably going to beat James Madison. You're at 3 wins there. You need to beat Virginia and Boston College, 2 teams that have struggled so far. They're both on the road. I understand you've had some trouble up in Boston. You've had some trouble in Charlottesville. But realistically speaking, these are games that you need to win now, because you dropped the ball in 2 of the first 3 games. If you would have beaten Syracuse and Florida State, or maybe even just lost to one of them, and you lose to like a Virginia or a Boston College, it makes it much more manageable now than if you were to go 0-2 against Syracuse and Florida State so far. So ultimately speaking, yes, I think that if you beat, James Madison, South Florida, Boston College, and Virginia, you're sitting at 5 wins total. You're going to have to pull off an upset against one of the ranked teams. Scott Satterfield and the Louisville Cardinals have not defeated a ranked team since Wake Forest back in 2019. I think that Wake Forest is probably the most likely of the 5 that you have a good chance against. Maybe Pittsburgh is right after that, but Clemson and Kentucky both are on the road. Both are games that you probably are not going to win. NC State top 15 at home on Senior Day. That's going to be a tough matchup to win against as well. So, I'm just trying to look at things realistically here. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what this does future implication wise is that it makes things that much more critical. Every single game is of the utmost importance to salvage this season. You're going to have to go on a little bit of a mini win streak here. I think if you win the next 3 games, like we all know that they can, I think you have a different conversation. I think if you're sitting at 4-2, you may look at this in a little bit of a different way because you handled your business. But right now, Louisville's got to show that even though they're improving, that they have to get the results as well. And that's a perfect segue into the next segment in the fact that, yes, it's nice that there are improvements being shown, but does it really matter if you're not getting the results? We're going to talk about that here in the final segment of the show. Before we do that, I want to say thank you all again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free on all streaming services, including YouTube and now WHAS 11 Plus, which you can find at WHAS11.com. Scroll to the sports section and find all of the Locked On Louisville videos here. 5 days a week, your team every day. So, like I mentioned, I'm not a believer in moral victories, but I do like to accept the fact that sometimes, there are some positives to point out. Now, what I'm not going to do here is I'm not going to be in the boat of, oh, Louisville, we thought they were going to lose by double digits, and they were, had a chance on the last drive to win the game. So they showed improvement. It's a loss, but it is what it is. I'm not going to do that because we saw on Friday night that Louisville was the better football team, and Florida State had to go with their backup quarterback. So no, I'm not going to give the Louisville Cardinals any bit of a pass, and nor should you. But what I am going to do is I'm going to accept the improvements for their face value. I'm going to, appreciate them. I'm going to appreciate the fact that the Louisville pass rush looked solid. I'm going to appreciate the fact that the playbook opened up a little bit more. I liked what Scott Satterfield, for the most part, was doing on offense. He allowed Malik Cunningham to utilize, his efforts on the ground. Malik Cunningham, 17 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns throughout the air. Yes, he made some mistakes and overthrew some receivers, but, he had a pretty decent day. Spread the ball out to multiple receivers, which is something that you needed to do. 6 receivers in total. Yes, maybe you have to get Marshawn Ford a little bit more involved, but at the end of the day, we wanted Malik Cunningham to spread the ball out more, and he's done just that. So we're seeing improvements offensively in that regard. The Louisville offensive line looked very solid against perhaps or one of the best defensive lines that they're going to face this season, but and then you look at defensively, like I said, pass rush looks solid, getting after the opposing ball carriers. I think the team had over 10 tackles for loss. I think it was like 4 sacks. Let me just double check that because I'm not necessarily too awful sure. 4 sacks, 2 pass deflections. They forced turnovers in this one. That's huge to focus on. That's something that you need to do. That's something that I've been talking about over the past couple weeks. And like I mentioned, the line of scrimmage was going to be a critical factor in this game. And I think that Louisville probably won both sides of the line of scrimmage, and that's something to maybe not hang your hat on, but it's worth acknowledging. You need to understand that it's nice for Louisville to improve. They're getting better week by week, and that's good, but it does not give a pass for the fact that this team is 1-2, because, and we're going to talk about it on tomorrow's episode as well, but hey, look, we've been told over the past handful of seasons, it's a matter of finishing, right? Finishing in the fourth quarter, finishing out games. And that was the mantra in the offseason, and we are already seeing that become a problem in week 3 of this season. Last year, you may have cut him a little bit of slack because it's year 3, and that it takes, a couple seasons, 3-4 seasons to get your guys in the program, get your your philosophies and your schemes, perfected and things of that nature. But every Louisville fan was like, okay, well, now the fact that, he's being brought back for year 4, this is going to be the telltale season, right? We need to see those results. Through week 3, we are not seeing those results. And honestly, Central Florida was pretty close to winning that game. And there's a very real possibility that Louisville could have been 0-3, but obviously we're not playing in the realms of hypotheticals right now because we're 1-2. And if you're going to focus on the losses being very, cut and dry, wins are the same way. So yes, the team is getting better, which is good. But in year 4 of Scott Satterfield's tenure, with over half of your starters coming back, with you utilizing the transfer portal to get better, you have a lot of your production from last year returning, players coming back from injury. There was no room for excuses. There was nothing to fall back on. And I'm not saying Scott Satterfield and company are doing that now, because I'm not. But the results have to come this year. So in the instance to where we talk about improvements and how this team is getting better, I appreciate that. But I also understand that in the grand scheme of things, you could go 2-10. Or let me put it this way. If you show improvement week by week and you're competitive in games and you show some solid things, but you go 2-10 and 3-9, it doesn't mean a damn thing how much improvement you show. Until you put that notch in the win column, it does not matter. Now, I'm not saying that, okay, Dalton, you don't care about improvements. Of course I care about improvements. I liked some things of what I saw from this team in week 3 against Florida State. I liked the fact that they're getting better each week, but I'm also frustrated because we're seeing the same issue that we've seen for the past 3 years, and it's time for it to stop. It's time to go to the results column and put those wins in that column. And I think that this team has the talent to do so. They have the talent, they've got the depth, they've got the pieces to be very, very solid, and that's what frustrates me the most. That's why I refuse to give this team a pass. That's why it doesn't matter how good you look. Well, I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter how great you look on the field in the next 3 weeks. If you don't beat South Florida and beat Virginia and beat Boston College, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to be that guy, but the margin of error could not be slimmer. You are staring down a season to where it gets harder as you go throughout. You are in the easy part of the schedule. You have to handle business. You have to execute. This team can do it. We've seen this team do it throughout the past 4 years, just not at a consistent rate like we need to see. That has to change heading into week 4 and beyond. So tomorrow's episode of the show, we're going to basically discuss more in depth on the positives that we saw, the areas of improvement heading into week 4, so on and so forth. So like I said, before we get out of here, I want to give a shout out to the Locked On ACC podcast. The host, Candace Cooper, has been doing a great job of covering the conference as a whole. Be sure to check that out. But that is going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here